Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Right, I want to talk about, we hear a lot about the word migrants and immigrants and refugees. It's in the papers all the time today, and it's very interesting about people that have to leave their place of birth for whatever reason. Some of them come back, like the Gibraltarians in the Second World War, but some of them never go home because the home doesn't exist anymore. And today I want to talk about a little-known race of people, and they're called Anglo-Indians. And what are Anglo-Indians, I hear you say? You might think they're people that are half Indian and half English, but that's only part of the story. When you think back to the British Raj and how Britain got a foothold in India, it all started in the early 1600s when people landed in India and they realized there was business to be had, and the British started opening up factories and they started settling there. It was businessmen then. And then after a few fights with the Portuguese and the French, Britain had control, well, not Britain, but the East India Trading Company had control of a lot of sections of the subcontinent. And they basically rode roughshod and bossed everybody about like typical colonials. And they upset a lot of people there. And in 1857, the Indians, well, it was called the Indian Mutiny, which you have to laugh about that. That's typical colonial language. But the Indian Mutiny was in 1857, and it was very bloody, and a lot of people died, and it was very embarrassing for Britain at the time because it was caused by the East India Trading Company and basically fat cats that had made loads of money there and abused the people that were there. So, the British took over. They said, right, you know, home rule, it's going to be a British colony from now on, and Queen Victoria will be Empress of India. So then everything kind of changed. It was more open, and it was a real time of prosperity. The British built lots of railways, they built towns, they built schools, churches, they sent lots of missionaries out there. And men flocked there. People flocked there for adventure and for jobs and for a very good life. And lots of single men were encouraged to mix with the native girls as kind of osmosis and to kind of Christianize them. And I mean, they just thought, we're going to be here for good, so let's just bed in and mix. And so these people, bed in, yeah, sorry, pardon the pun. That wasn't, I didn't mean that, by the way. And so this sort of osmosis, and then you had to, like, it wasn't just English people, there were people from all over Europe that got on a boat and went to India for the adventure. And at first, these people were called Eurasians, European Asians, the fruit that was born from these liaisons. But then with time, they just became Anglo-Indian. And anybody anybody with that kind of mixed blood, but that had to be like brought up and had a few generations in India, were termed as Anglo-Indian. And, you know, they all ended up marrying each other because once you were an Anglo-Indian, you know, the British, the expats didn't want to touch you. I mean, they were the sorts that, they were English, they came from England, they had their job sorted out, and they sent all their kids back to boarding school in England, even if it meant they were away from them for like 3 years or something. A lot of them didn't integrate. And then you had the higher class Indian and the lower caste of Indians. So there was lots of separation. So basically the Anglo-Indians that started in the 1600s they found themselves and they married each other and they became like the middle class of India, and they became engineers and teachers and basically civil servants. And that, you know, there was a lot of, it was a good life. There was cheap land, cheap servants. It was, you know, it was a nice life. And why am I talking about this, I hear you ask? Why am I talking about Anglo-Indians? Well, my father is an Anglo-Indian. And I've been looking into I've known this all my life. Obviously, I've been brought up by Anglo-Indians, but I've looked into the family history and I found out how our family got, because it was like a sort of double emigration. People go there and then they come and they move to other places. So my great-great-great-grandfather was a guy called Christopher Friis, and he was Norwegian. And he left Norway in his early 20s. It was in 1860. And he left under a cloud. You know, nobody knows quite what he did. He might have murdered someone or witnessed a murder, but that's another story. Anyway, he got on a boat, went to Ireland, changed his name to Charles Brown, but spelt with an E on the end, because that is a very common Irish name. And he got on the next boat to India. You know, he's obviously running away from something. You know, 5 years later, he was marrying a local girl in Bombay, and he started a family. And, you know, as I said, it was a good life. And they had a lot of children, these people. They had big houses, they had servants. It was great, you know, there were jobs aplenty. So this photograph here is this is Christopher Freese's one. These are all people from the same family, and this is a typical picture of an Anglo-Indian family. That's Mum in the middle. She's the woman that married the Norwegian guy, and you can see that she's got Indian blood, but then they're all her daughters, all of them around her. She had some sons as well. And so you can see, even though it's black and white, that some of them have got light eyes, some have got dark eyes, and then you get this kind of hybrid of people, and that's very typical of Anglo-Indian. Look at that lovely scene. They're all wearing Western clothes. This is in Bombay. And they're all, you know, that's the classic. Lay a carpet in the garden, put some tables out, and have a nice family photograph. So that's you can sort of see how the mixtures of the race, you'll see that in further photographs I'm going to show you. They were very Western, they were Christian, and they had British education, good education. And Christopher Freese's eldest son was called Oscar, and he got married and had 7 children. And these are his. I don't know, for some reason, all our photographs seem to be sexist. You know, it's either all men or all women. Don't know why that is, but this are the grandchildren of that Norwegian guy, and the one at the back with the bow tie on it is my grandfather, and his name is Walton Woolard Brown, and they're his brothers, and he also had some sisters. And you know, again, good family, lots of engineers, lots of opportunities, did very well for themselves. But then this was the time of World War I, and my grandfather joined the army, and he was sent to Egypt, and he worked under Field Marshal Allenby, you know, with T.E. Lawrence and all them in Egypt. And you know, and when he finished, when the war ended, he was posted to Madras, and that's where he met my grandmother, because she was also an Anglo-Indian, and she was from Madras, from a long-standing Anglo-Indian family. And he left the army because he thought, I'm going to get married now, and he joined the police force, and they moved. Then the family moved. This is them. There he is on the right-hand side. That's my grandmother there. And then some of her children. I mean, my grandparents had 8 children. You know, they had a lot of children, these people. And this is my grandmother's family. And again, you see the mixture. Some people have got very dark hair and dark eyes, and some of them are lighter. And it's a very interesting mix of blood. So my grandfather became the chief of police, and they had in the Tamil area, in the Madras area, and they spoke Tamil. And my grandfather was born in 1944, and he had a fabulous life. You know, I know you might be offended by this, but no Indian family album is complete without a picture of your family standing in front of a dead tiger. And it was all sort of very Rudyard Kipling and elephants and cobras and a good life. You know, my dad was brought up with this is his nanny, and they're called an ayah, A-Y-A-H. And look at her, isn't she glorious? And they would teach you that my dad spoke Tamil with his ayah, and they would tell you interesting stories. It's a very mystical place, India. There's lots of spooky stories, and children that they love that. So it's a picture this beautiful idyllic lifestyle, bungalows, plants, insects, nice smells, you know, everything's good. But then trouble was brewing, and there was the Indian independence movement with Gandhi and Nehru, and you know, the Quit India movement. And a lot of the Anglo-Indians were divided about this because they were brought up to be, oh, British is best, and, you know, how dare you Indians want your independence. And so some of them were saying if they got independence, they leave. My family were pro-India independence. My grandfather was a member of the Congress Party, and he had meetings with them. And my family were happy the day of Indian independence, and my dad tells me lovely stories as a young boy of what a fantastic day that was. And, you know, lots of Anglo-Indians left, and at the time there was 800,000 Anglo-Indians living in India, and that's dwindled a lot up to the present day. But my family stayed there. It was their home. Their ancestry wasn't English anyway. It was, you know, dated back to Norway. But you know, it was, they said, we're staying here, we're fine, it's not dangerous, it's fine. But then, then disaster struck. You know, a month after Indian independence, my grandfather went to work one morning. He was the chief of police, it was quite a dangerous job, and he never came back. And he died, and he was only like 49, but there's a cloud over that as well. Some people say he had a heart attack, and some people say he got shot, but then that's another story. But anyway, it changed everything. Everything was turned upside down. The house that they lived in came with the job. The whole state had changed. There was no welfare, no insurance, no social security, and the family were torn to pieces. My grandmother was pregnant at the time, and she was very young, and so everyone was split up. 3 years later, my dad's eldest brother, he went and got a job in London. He finished his training as an engineer, and that was the only choice to go and live in London. And so my granny settled with the children stayed in India with the youngest ones. And eventually, you know, money was running out. She had to dramatically decrease her standard of living. She ended up going to Pakistan and staying with her in this lovely house here in Karachi with her brother that was in the Royal Navy. And my dad has very idyllic memories of living in Karachi and with his cousins and American comics, and they learned Urdu and Hindi from the servants up there. But then change was to come again, because my uncle in London found a house. He got a house with his job just outside in Portsmouth, and he said, "Mum, you know, we've got this house in England, you can come and live in it. It's got 3 bedrooms and a garden, and, you know, what else are you going to do? And you can't live with your brother forever and you live off charity." And they had to make a big decision. This was their home, this was their country, and they had to go to England. But they thought, oh, we're British, you know, it'd be fine. Let's go there. So they got ready to go. I mean, look at this picture. This is my dad and his 2 brothers and his sister and my granny with, you know, the good old carpet in the garden again for the photograph. And this is in Karachi. And look at what they're wearing. Forget about the women, the boys. It's 1955, and they look like they're in an Edwardian film, you know. And you ask Anglo-Indians, sort of, where did you get at that time, you know, what did you know about England? They said, oh, we learned all about England from Charles Dickens novels. And that says it all, really, doesn't it? And so they left, and they had to go to England. And this is them, you know, they go from that to that. This is a council house in the biggest council estate in Europe called Lee Park, just outside Portsmouth. And there's my dad. He's the taller one with the checked shirt on, and with his sister and his brother and his cousin. And they had to completely change. And there was racism in England. And, you know, Anglo-Indians had English names like, you know, David Brown. My dad's name is David Brown, and, you know, my grandmother was Barbara Peters. And there was a colour bar, you know, there's a very, very funny story about a lady that had phoned up called Norma Parker, and she you know, they were all educated in boarding schools, so they spoke the Queen's English, and was like, oh, I want to rent a room in this house in London. So she turns up to this house to move in, and the woman said, oh my God, you didn't tell me you were a darkie. And so this is what, you know, poor Anglo-Indians had to put up with. So, you know, racism, lack of jobs. This is my family again and some of their friends. Classic picture outside Tower Bridge. You know, we've come to Britain, but no, you're not really British. You're only half British. You know, you're going to be a second-class citizen. You're an economic migrant. So anyway, gosh, the time's running out. So I'm going to just, Anglo-Indians are a completely different culture, and my dad there. That's my dad. And My dad's here today. I don't know where he's sitting, but he moved to Gibraltar. He never really settled in England, lived there for a long time, but he moved to Gibraltar because he said he could smell coriander in the streets at night, and it reminded him of home. Thank you.